Our next speaker is Dr. Maria Vorontsova, who's also a fellow of the Society. She is a research leader in integrated monography at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, and her passion is grasses and everything about them. And she particularly focuses on tropical African diversity and on poorly known lineages of grasses, evolutionary history, and the history of tropical grasslands and savannas. She is the book reviews editor for the Botanical Journal of the Linnean Society, and she sits on the Systematics Association Council and is an editor of the journal Phytotaxa. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? So this research project that we did was never really intended to be a very serious undertaking. It seemed like a kind of fun, interesting thing to do. So most of the work I'm going to describe to you was done by Heather Linden. Would you mind standing up and waving? So Heather spends her time compiling and maintaining the International Plant Names Index. The second person who's here today is Lauren would you mind standing up and waving? Lauren Gardiner. Okay. Okay. So we were also very fortunate to have a friend who's a programmer involved in the development of Wikipedia, which we used for this work. I come from a Russian family, and in modern Russian slang, the word botanik means a complete nerd who spends all the time in the library and has no friends. So we did this project in our spare time because it just seemed like such an interesting thing to look into. So we fully deserve the title of botanic, I guess. Botany at its finest. So could I have a quick show of hands? How many botanists do we have here who have published a plant species? Please put up your hand. Okay, so quite a few. Okay, maybe less than half. So taxonomic botany, it's an unusually historic and retrospective scientific discipline. And this is a picture of me during my postdoctorate research, looking at many, many dead plants stuck onto bits of paper. We look at plants stuck onto bits of paper, and we decide which ones of these constitute species or possibly new species. So once we decide that there's a new species, here's an example of a new species published by Lauren. It's a brand new orchid. We have the Latin plant name, and the names of the people who've described this species are recorded very carefully. So botanical nomenclature is a well-organized and retrospective scientific discipline. We have strict rules, and we must always use the first scientific name proposed for any given species. And because the daily job of a plant taxonomist involves working on plant nomenclature, incredibly careful records have been kept in this discipline, which is what gave us an opportunity to study all women who published new plant names from the very beginning of Linnean nomenclature. So a quick introduction to the International Plant Names Index. When Darwin did his work, he had some trouble finding the correct names for his plants, because there's so much literature, people publish independently, and there's a big tradition of just copying other people's plant lists. So Darwin left some money to make an authoritative index explaining where are the first descriptions of all plants. So this work has been done mainly based at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and the first lot was published in 1895. The modern iteration of Index Kewensis is the International Plant Names Index. Botanical Bibliography, it's the right task for somebody who is a botanic, because IPNU holds 1.5 million plant names. And the thing that we were really fortunate to be able to access isn't just 1.5 million plant names, but almost 50,000 people who worked on these plant names. So if others of you who are not botanists, if you know any botanist, IPNI is a fantastic place to find out all about their names. So if we search for Lauren's name, we find out her date of birth, which is found and compiled. And the reason this is done is we need to distinguish Lauren's identity from all the other people with the surname Gardiner. So Lauren has her own abbreviation, LM Gardiner. And if we go back a few slides, see, all the species that Lauren is describing are marked with LM Gardiner, which is a unique identifier for her as a publishing taxonomist. Okay, so also we can search IPNI, and it's a very reliable resource for exactly what plant names Lauren has published. We also used Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has articles on every single first name of a person, male and female first names in English language Wikipedia. I'm going to go through the methods. Okay, this slide, we need to skip past it as fast as possible because I don't understand Perl scripting. But we were very lucky to have Abby, who does understand Perl scripting. And she was able to automatically assign every single author of plant names as likely male, likely female, or we don't know. So before we knew it, our research project generated 15,000 people, of which, so if you look at the right-hand column, this is the very beginning of our big list of people. Some of them are definitely male. Only one of them here is definitely female. And the others, we didn't know whether they were male or female because some first names are ambiguous. For some people, we only have initials. Some people's names are in language like Chinese, which doesn't have gendered first names. So we discovered that in Chinese language, it's not possible to tell from a person's name whether they're male or female. Okay, we've made the two results. Our first set of results is pretty much as expected. So one person has published a maximum of about 10,000 plant species, but these people are very few in number. And the vast majority of people who publish plants publish just one. And this kind of power law relationship is seen in all analysis of academic authorship. That's pretty normal. And when we first saw these results a few years ago now, to be honest, I was a little bit shocked because the situation is worse than I thought. So on the left-hand side, we have every person who ever described a plant species, and 12% of these we know to be female. Then all names described with the intention of publishing a new plant species, we have about 600,000 of them, but only 3% of them were described by people who are female. Okay? So we saw this and we thought, surely it's an artifact of time because the majority of plant species were described a very long time ago when women were not formally participating in science. So we took this data and we broke it down by decades. Okay. So what you see here is every species of flowering plant and whether it was described by a male named person, a female named person, or by a person whose name we weren't able to assign by decade. So overall, the numbers are as we'd expect. In the 19th century and early 20th century, a lot of material started coming into Europe from diversity-rich countries. These were named. So the peak of plant naming and species description took place in the 19th and earliest 20th centuries. And the little blue peaks of the women are beginning to creep up from the bottom, but they're not really very big. So next we looked at the percentages, and the percentages confirms your worst fears. At the moment, 12% of new plant species are described by women. Okay. Yeah, so let's just sit with that for a few seconds. 12%. So we went to try to compare it to this paper here, published in PLOS ONE. It's the only analysis we were able to find with a comparable data set. So this is all papers in all sciences, including humanities, including sociology, big analysis of gender contribution to academic scholarship, pretty much across the world. And what you're seeing here is disciplines ranked by simply the number of female authors present in their data set. So at the top, mathematics has the fewest women, philosophy doesn't have many women, economics has more. So we are in the disciplines of ecology and evolution, molecular and cell biology, between 20 and 30% female participation. Interestingly, that not a single discipline makes it up to 50% women. So if we go back again to the previous slide, since 1990, for the last 3 decades, 10 to 12% of plant species are described by women. And I think describing a plant species can be viewed as a kind of paper publication. So if we compare taxonomic botany to what we know about general scientific scholarship, taxonomic botany is somewhere between mathematics and philosophy. And actually, the statistics for taxonomy are way, way lower than ecology and evolution, and they're lower than genetics, and they're lower than chemistry. So that was not what we expected to find when we started this project. So another slide from the interesting paper by West. So once again, we're looking at all the corpus of scholarly literature. That's all scientific research, but this time we're starting at the beginning of 20th century. So this is kind of like one of the scissor graphs that Athene presented about. We can see when last authorship became more prestigious, because maybe as soon as it became more prestigious, female percentages of it dropped. Okay, so, and in this slide, I tried to do a more detailed comparison. So top, it's our analysis of taxonomic botany plant descriptions by women. And as far as I'm aware, our data set turned out to be the most comprehensive timeline data of female participation in science in any scientific analysis ever published. So we went through the literature, and nobody else has a data set as good as taxonomic botany on participation, basically for 250 years. So the big analysis of JSTOR data only covers 20th century onwards. And if we look at the percentage female productivity graphs, overall, 28% of article authorships are female, but only 12% of species authorships are female. So interesting. So it's pretty much half. Women publish half as much in taxonomy as they do in sciences in general. So many interesting things fell out of that. The first ever plant described by a woman was a ginger in 1787. It was described by Elizabeth Blackwell. And the reason Elizabeth published this book of beautiful illustrations is that her family had financial issues and her husband was in prison for debt. So from what we could figure out, it looked like this work happened because Elizabeth was desperate to get her husband out of debt prison. Then the second one, it's also a female artist in 1799, Mary Lawrence, published 3 roses. And if anybody is interested in the details of early female taxonomists, please talk to Heather, because she's done a lot more detailed research on this recently. And there's a lot of interesting things that we found out. Okay, so a little bit more statistics, if you bear with me. Altogether, on the left-hand side, so men are expected to describe 3 species each, male taxonomists. Female taxonomists are expected to describe 1.5 species each. Right-hand side at the top, it's the average number of species described per person. So all of this slide, we're looking at productivity of individual people in order to understand how this thing worked. So, of course, 100 years ago, there were many new plants to be described, and now we've almost finished describing plant diversity. So in the past, a lot more new species were available, which is why the graph on the top right is going down. And the more interesting for me is the red line on the bottom. So female productivity compared to male productivity is increasing. And at the moment, female taxonomists are on average 80% as productive as male ones. So it's still true now. We are not publishing as many species as our male counterparts. So just something to be aware of. then we made a table of the most productive male and female authors of plant names. Bear in mind, in terms of biological diversity, this is not completely accurate because there were changes in how botanical nomenclature is recorded, and some of these early names are really new combinations rather than new species. But it's quite apparent that all the most productive men have authored 5,000 plus new plant species. And the most productive women are looking, you know, not quite the same in terms of numbers. And we were quite excited to discover that one of the most productive women is still alive and active today. And we believe that our research was responsible for Charlotte publishing even more Neotropical Rubiaceae once we told her about our discovery. She specializes in the coffee family, and she works at the Missouri Botanical Garden. There's a fantastic interview with her recently on the Missouri Botanical Garden website, if anybody wants to go and look. Okay, so it's time to admit to our errors. We carried out checks on 500 most productive male and female people, because with so many people, we couldn't check all the names manually. And there's still a lot of improvements to be made. So Heather has gone back last year and she rechecked all the female plant name authors before 1900. And it turns out the situation actually is even worse than we realized in the first stages of our project. Yeah. So we originally thought that 93 female botanists published plant names before 1900, but it turns out there were only 27. So for the next round of the project, we'd need to pay more attention to Francophone names. Okay, so a quick recent addition, some results that we calculated literally quite late yesterday evening. We looked at the population of scientists who described unpublished plant species, and we thought it'd be interesting to also see, well, who collected those plant species, who went in the field and did the expeditions. So this part of the analysis is new and very much smaller. We looked at data that we could obtain from the Kew Herbarium Catalogue. This is back to our first data on taxonomists. These are the same pie charts again. I'm putting these pie charts on the top part of the sheet. So we had taxonomists who published species. And now many of the very same people also went out and collected plants. So we used the same gendered dataset lists, and we looked at which ones of the publishing taxonomists went and also collected plants in the field. So this isn't really a fair test because we're looking at the same set of people, and female collection seems to be a little bit higher overall than female publications. Then we're looking at the timeline again. And the bottom one is the brand new analysis of female collections as opposed to female species publication. So the initial conclusion is, yes, women have done some collecting, but the numbers are still really, really rather low. In fact, 25% female collections maximum. Okay. So I'd like to say thank you to the journal Taxon, who published our review, open access. It's available for everybody to download. Our project has now sparked follow-on research. There is one project in China looking at similar things, another project in India looking at Indian female taxonomists, and another paper has been published by mycologists looking at female mycologists. And we're interested in finding ways and maybe continuing this research. So please come and talk to us about it. Thank you very much. Thank you.